This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Yes, for your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. This, by the way, is podcast number 266, and we are recording on August 3rd, 2020. What we're going to be doing this week, just because we have a little bit of a break between stuff we need to talk about, shows that are around and stuff, is we're doing something we're calling 10 for 10 from 2. And basically, each of us, Will and I, picked 10 showrunners that we enjoy, and then we each picked like a project for them to adapt. It could be kind of anything. It could be a book, a comic book, a video game, an existing TV show that would be rebooted, just any kind of thing that we would want this showrunner to adapt that we think would be an interesting pick. And we're going to kind of discuss why we picked them for it and what we think would be interesting about that. A little bit before we start, when I made my first list, I realized, wow, it's just a bunch of white guys. And I said, okay, I need to adjust some things, get a little bit of diversity in there. It's a little bit hard to do. It kind of shows you that there aren't a lot of, showrunners of different, groups.
When I was like researching, that's what struck me was like, just like how dominated Hollywood is by like straight white men. It's, like obviously it's not like new news, but it just kind of like when you research it, it hits you. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I obviously like there's a lot of those showrunners that I love, but I also wanted to kind of include more women, more diversity in my list, like to try and, like spotlight some of that because there are a lot of great female, there's a lot of great, people of color, working in the industry too. And I kind of wanted to do that. Unfortunately, with a lot of that, there's like a lot of people whose work I haven't personally experienced.
Yeah.
So I couldn't like just put them on my list just because, unfamiliarity. Cause a lot of them, like they do dramas and stuff that just aren't in my wheelhouse. And I'm just kind of like, so it was kind of difficult.
Yeah, definitely. We both have a kind of leaning towards like genre heavy stuff, like fantasy and sci-fi and stuff like that. Yeah. And that makes it even harder because like as you get more into like specific stuff like that, you get even less, roles from people of color being involved in it and stuff. And I think that's just starting to change. Like I think that's starting to change just now. And so like in the future, this doing something like this and keeping it with a little bit more diversity might be easier. You have like Lovecraft Country coming out, which is like a very like, fantasy horror project, but from a black showrunner,
Right. And that looks amazing.
Yeah. So it's like when you have kind of stuff like that, you're starting to get some more diverse voices in there. So that'll be interesting. Maybe this is something we could revisit years down the line and be able to have a better diversity in our lineup on the thing here. But some of it's just like, I'll like look up and I'm like, yeah, here's some black showrunners, but I haven't really seen much of their work. So it's hard for me to pick what I'd like them to do. And I even came into that with, and I was talking to you about this earlier, like, Damon Lindelof didn't make my list personally, just because like I'm kind of isolated in what I read and stuff. Like when you think about other things that I pay attention to, like books and stuff, I'm very much into like the fantasy area. And like, I don't really think about that when I think about like Damon Lindelof. Like I think of him as more like, okay, it needs to be kind of like something spiritualistic and something that's dealing with like mysteries and stuff. And I don't really read stuff like that. I watch stuff like that, but I don't really read stuff like that. So it becomes like I couldn't come up with something that I wanted him to do that I'm aware of. Like I couldn't come up with a project that I'm really well aware of that I'm like, that would be a good fit for Damon Lindelof. It was more like, I just want to see the next thing he does, and I have no idea what that'll be. So there's a bit of that too in there, So yeah, that's kind of our excuse for not having a ton of diversity on our list. We tried and we'll continue to try as we watch stuff to kind of get more diverse voices into our lexicon or into our, the zeitgeist of the show and what we pay attention to. But we're lean so heavily into genre stuff, and there just aren't a lot of voices there yet, and hopefully that changes. But let's start off. I'll go through our list here. We have a few of them where we pick the same showrunner, just so you guys know, and different kind of ideas for them. That's just inevitable. Like I said, Will and I have certain tastes that are aligned. There's certain showrunners that we both really like, and it's obvious that we're both gonna pick them. Thankfully, I ended up going through both of our lists, and there's no repeats in the actual content. So that'll keep things a little bit fresh on that side. But I've kind of stacked them up. So like my first pick is Bryan Fuller, and that'll be Will's first pick too, so that we can line these up and talk about, two projects from the same kind of person. So that's where I'm going to start. My first pick is Bryan Fuller. If you've listened to this podcast at all, you've heard Will and I just adore him and go on about how amazing he is, like in so many different projects, mainly Hannibal.
So amazing.
Yeah. We've done our top 10 of the year kind of things, and he's kind of always adorned like in our best showrunner category whenever he's had anything on the air pretty much. He's also, I did a top 10 list of showrunners like a while ago, and he made the top of my list on that one. He's a great showrunner. My pick for him is something that I've always wanted to see done by somebody, and then it kicked into my head that he'd be a good one for it, and that's Highlander. And I've even talked about this before on a different podcast where we talked about kind of projects that would be interesting to see remade, not even talking about who would make it. And initially I was thinking more along the lines of the original Highlander series that would be kind of more grounded and in reality and stuff. But I'm like, but you have these fantasy elements, and it'd be interesting to see somebody like Bryan Fuller take that on, where you could get a lot more fantasy elements, but not too dependent on existing lore,
Right. You just lean into the fantasy.
Lean into the surreal aspects.
The surrealism, yeah. I think Bryan Fuller, excels at that. So.
Think about a quickening in Highlander, when the lightning comes down stuff. Now imagine Bryan Fuller doing a show with a quickening, I
think if you watch American Gods season 1, you know how Bryan Fuller really leans into the most surreal elements of that narrative. And you know how he makes it visually arresting, interesting, even though I wasn't in love with that particular show. It was definitely not, it was interesting. You know?
It just ended up, for me, I think American Gods just ended up being something that I just wasn't too terribly into the story.
Right.
I love the presentation of it. I love the character interactions and stuff, but I just wasn't too involved in the story. But then you look at Hannibal, and it's fucking amazing. And it's just, I could totally see him handling Highlander in a way in which, he brings in more fantasy, brings in more surreal elements, but still keeps it grounded somehow in the same way Hannibal is. Hannibal's got tons of surreal stuff going on. Tons of stuff that's wait, what the fuck is this? Visions, things like that. And yet it's not steeped in some weird lore, it's trying to explain weird magic systems for other things, or it's not doing any of that. It's got it's grounded as a drama, a detective drama basically, but then still has all that elements. And that's kind of where I think I'd love to see Highlander being redone as. And I just want to add one other thing, which is that it wouldn't even have to be Highlander. I just want the story of Highlander, of immortals, fighting each other to the death, and evaluating things from their lives as they've gone through. It wouldn't even have to be about a Scottish man from the MacLeod family. It could be something completely different. Just as long as it's a story about these immortals that are fighting to the death kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's what I really want. So your pick was also Bryan Fuller. Tell us what your pick was.
Yeah, so Bryan Fuller, my pick for Bryan Fuller was something he was supposed to do, but then he left the project, or he got removed from the project, and somebody else, Alex Kurtzman, was put in to ultimately produce a mediocre product, which I thought would have been much better had it been Bryan Fuller, and that's Star Trek.
I think it was Alex Kurtzman was originally attached to the project, and then Bryan Fuller joined as he was going going to be the showrunner, and then they just clashed.
Yeah, at some point, Bryan Fuller was supposed to be a showrunner.
Yeah.
But it never happened.
Because Alex Kurtzman didn't run it either. It was somebody else that ran it, but he was like he was the producer in charge of the project.
Whatever. It turned out mediocre. I feel like a Bryan Fuller Star Trek would be amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like
he's worked on Star Trek before. He loves Star Trek. So he would definitely have passion for the project. And it's kind of a shame we didn't get that, because when it was announced, I think a lot of people were excited at the prospect of Bryan Fuller doing Star Trek.
Oh yeah, I certainly was. I certainly was on board. I mean, and then like Discovery came out, and I was like, they changed the Klingons again, and I was like, the fandom had so much, so many issues trying to square the Klingons from the original series with the Next Generation Klingons. Why make a third version of them? That just makes it worse. Why did you do that? Oh my God. But anyway.
He also went for kind of like a dark, gritty look instead of kind of the bright.
Yeah, which I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of making Star Trek dark and gritty.
Yeah.
Like suddenly like it's morally gray. And like I know Deep Space Nine did that, but Deep Space Nine
a little bit. It was, but like even then, it was
much better handled, much better done, I think.
Star Trek's always been kind of utopian in the idea that like this is the right path forward, and there's going to be struggles, and then we're going to answer those struggles. And that's kind of always what Star Trek's been about. That's what made it different from things like Star Wars or other, space set properties or something that are gritty and dark. And it's like, that's not what Star Trek ever was about.
And I think Bryan Fuller could do something hopeful. Like he's done, like everything Bryan Fuller's done. It isn't Hannibal. It isn't like dark and dreary. He's done pushing daisies, which is like
pushing daisies like a fairy tale.
It's like a fairy tale. Yeah, it's like very bright and kind of hopeful. I think he could do that with Star Trek for sure. Again, it's going to be visually arresting. There's like a lot of stuff he could do with like aliens and stuff. I just thought, man, that would have been so awesome, and unfortunately it didn't happen. So it's on my list.
Yeah. Okay, so my next pick is another one that we both ended up choosing, which is Vince Gilligan. He's the showrunner of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Before that, he'd worked on a myriad of projects, including like the X-Files and stuff. He's a very beloved director for like his realism and for portraying things like schemes and heists and consequences and things like that. He's always been really known. And so my pick for him is a fantasy book series called The Gentleman Bastards. And why I chose that is it's fantasy, but it's kind of light fantasy. Like the main characters aren't really that involved in the fantasy elements. They're just kind of like normal people, but then there are like fantasy elements outside of them or that work as antagonists against them. But the primary thing is that each book is like a big con. It's like a big, like a heist or a con or something like that. That's what each book is, with this group of thieves basically that are like, planning these elaborate cons and stuff. And I was just thinking about, you think of like the Slippy Jimmy stuff from like, Better Call Saul, or like even some of the schemes like the train job and like Breaking Bad and stuff. And it's like, it makes me think like, wow, he'd be really good at portraying these big cons and making them feel like realistic and possible and stuff. But I've never seen Vince Gilligan do anything remotely fantasy, really. I guess the closest would be X-Files, which is like sci-fi stuff. But I'd really like to see what he would do, because I think another thing that Vince Gilligan's really good at is like making the setting like a part of the story. Like New Mexico and Breaking Bad is so huge into the look of that show and everything. And so I'd love to see what he would do in the world of a fantasy thing, like how he would bring that together, still keep it gritty, still keep it real, and what he would do with that. I don't know if it's something he would ever do, but it's something I'd like to see him do.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You're way more familiar with The Gentleman Bastards than I am. It's obviously a book series I've never read. I should start reading it. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think you dig it. It's kind of a dark fantasy stuff, but the fantasy's light. It's kind of to the peripheral.
Right. Absolutely. So my pick for Vince Gilligan was, I picked Dr. Doom, and I was struggling to think of something with Vince Gilligan because like I feel like his wheelhouse is taking these complicated, morally ambiguous characters and exploring them. You know, like his stuff is character studies. If you watch like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, they're character stories about how like well-meaning people can turn to like more like a villainous or morally gray path. And I feel like for that, I feel like if Marvel was to do a Doctor Doom, like anything with Doctor Doom, give it to Vince Gilligan, because I feel like that fits perfectly, because Doctor Doom is like my favorite villain in the Marvel universe, but for the reason that he is this complex character, he is like this morally gray character, right? Like he wants to take over the world, but he wants to take over the world because he thinks he's the best person to run it, to like fix all the problems. Like he doesn't have like evil intentions. He just he has like these personality defects.
He never says mwahahaha.
Yeah, no, he's not a mustache twirling. He's just like this flawed character. He has these personality defects that make him a villain. Like it's not like out of any actual desire to be a villain, you know. And I think that makes him interesting. That makes him complex. I think Vince Gilligan can really do a deep dive character study on him, and you'd get something much better than like how he's been portrayed in the media like so far, like especially in like the crappy Fox Fantastic Four films that do treat him like a mustache twirling villain and nothing else. You know, like I just feel like it's time this character got his due, and I think Vince Gilligan could definitely do that.
Plus, we just really need some of these MCU Disney Plus shows, you know?
Yes,
weren't we already supposed to have some of these by now? I mean,
we were, yeah. We were. Now they're all delayed. Like I bought like a year of Disney Plus to watch some Marvel shows, and none of them are premiering within the window of my subscription.
Yeah. Curse you, COVID.
Yeah. Curse you, COVID. Exactly.
Yeah, we'd need some of these. That would be a good one, especially if it's in that vein, whereas like the Disney Plus stuff is the MCU Disney Plus stuff is all supposed to be like an elongated movie, basically. Like the same budget as one of the movies, the same production values. So God. that would be cool to see Vince Gilligan work with something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Give him the budget. Man, you'd have something magnificent.
So my next pick is David Simon. He is the creator and showrunner of The Wire. He also did one we covered recently, The Plot Against America. He's kind of known for doing some very politically active stuff. And so this is, again, one that I doubt he would ever want to take on because, you know, it kind of goes a little bit away from his mission, I guess you could say. But there's a fantasy series called Imager, and it's very steeped in, like, politics and espionage and just kind of, like, the rich, like the manipulations of the rich and stuff. And I think David Simon would do something amazing with that. And I think he could kind of introduce some kind of like similarities to our own culture to kind of create like little comparisons in the same way he did with The Plot Against America, making some very obvious ties between Lindbergh and Trump in that presentation. I think he could do something very similar with Imager, not with necessarily a figure like Trump, but with just the overly wealthy and, you know, the kind of class struggle. And I think he's uniquely qualified to handle that kind of story. And even though like this is completely departed from reality, it has nothing to do with our reality. And that's what makes me think it would be something David Simon wouldn't be interested in at all. It's still something I would love to see.
Right. I have no familiarity with Imager, you know, so I'll have to take your word for it on this,
But put it this way, the idea of David Simon doing something like his works, but in kind of a fantasy setting.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So your next pick is a showrunner that I enjoy quite a bit. And
yes.
We're going to do 2 weeks from now, we're going to be covering one of his shows, so.
And that I'm actually surprised is not on your list, but hey, that's good because we got him, and that's Charlie Brooker. He's most popular, I believe, for Black Mirror, but Black Mirror is probably like the darkest thing he does. I was like reading over like his, you know, like the stuff he's done, and it seems like he does like a lot of comedy. So he's responsible for Brass Eye, The 11 O'Clock Show, A Touch of Cloth, also the Dead Set, which is like about zombies, apparently. And I thought, so like, and I've seen some of his like non-Black Mirror stuff. Like I've seen like some of like Brass Eye and stuff, and it's hilarious. The dude knows comedy, knows what's funny, and so why not give him? And Black Mirror also shows his commentary on technology and how technology can go wrong, and so why not give him the ultimate British comedy, science fiction comedy where shit just goes wrong all the time, and that and that would be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where like the opening is like aliens blow up the Earth. I mean, if that doesn't say Charlie Brooker, then what does? I don't know.
It's also interesting because Black Mirror itself, when it was like on the slate for Channel 4, which it was on before Netflix in the UK, it was listed as a comedy. So really? I don't think most people would look at Black Mirror as a comedy, but like in its original intention, it's supposed to be a very black, dark comedy.
Right.
And that's kind of what it is. So like, yeah, he definitely has worked a lot in comedy. He does a lot of like commentary stuff too about society. So it would be kind of funny to see him take on something that's already so witty, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah. I would love to see his take on it. In my opinion, there aren't any really great live action takes on the property. I enjoyed the movie, enough, I guess.
The movie works because of the performances. They got some good roles in there. Alan Rickman, is really great.
Yeah, Alan Rickman's good, shit. But yeah, they got some good performances, obviously, in that. But the writing could have been stronger, and maybe that's where Charlie Brooker is needed, because I think he'd knock it out of the park in the writing department, for sure. And I think what he would come up with would be just as hilarious as anything Douglas Adams wrote.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to see. I think it'd be interesting to see a TV show version of that in general, because that series always works better in long form than it does in short form.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Because there's so many aspects to it. And the nice thing about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy too is it wouldn't just be a direct adaptation of the books, because the way it works is like each incarnation of it is like a unique adaptation. Like the story changes with each adaptation. And so he does not have to follow like what happened in the books. He can take these characters and these scenarios and do whatever he wants with it. Mm-hmm. And the fan base, like, I guess, like, as far as I'm concerned, I'd be totally fine with that, because it's not the same thing, like, repeated to different mediums over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to bring up, just as like a little side note, is that if you have an old school Chromecast, like the first model Chromecast, the serial number for it is H2G242.
Oh, nice.
Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy 42.
That's awesome. So. I'm glad some nerd at Google, got that through.
It's had a huge influence on tech companies and stuff, because there was a website, Babelfish, that translated languages. Well, where did Babelfish come from? That's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So yeah, it'd be cool to see kind of somebody pick that up again and do something long form with it. And Charlie Brooker has the wit for it. So yeah, that would be a good match. My next pick is Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's kind of like the it girl of showrunners right now. She's like taking on a ton of projects. She did Fleabag, which was like got huge critical acclaim, but she's probably more known now for Killing Eve, which she only did the first season of, but she produces the whole thing, but she ran the first season of, which I think was the best season, by the way. And yeah, like Killing Eve to me, and I don't want to say this dismissively, but it's going to sound that way, was always kind of like Hannibal light to me. It was, it kind of had like a Hannibal feel, but it was lighter in tone. Like it was more of like a fun kind of show. Like it was more going in with the idea of like, okay, you have these kind of big, larger than life, like weird characters, and you're gonna like kind of stay with them more and enjoy kind of the comedy and the absurdity of them and stuff. And so my idea for her is there is a show on Fox called Brimstone. And I don't even necessarily have to, it doesn't even necessarily have to be Brimstone, because there's like a whole bunch of shows and movies and other things that have used the exact same idea as Brimstone, both before Brimstone and after it, including shows like Reaper, if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I've seen Reaper.
It's basically the trope of somebody being forced to collect souls that escaped from hell.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, take somebody like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and put her in charge charge of like all these eccentric, weird characters that have escaped from hell. And you could make it really fun and funny as they're being pursued. And you have these people that aren't just like blanket evil, but are like, they have their own little weird ticks and quirks and stuff. And really being able to kind of bring those out, I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge would be a great pick for that. I think that would be funny to see.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not overly familiar with her work. I did not watch Killing Eve. So, like I said, like, this is one showrunner, like, I was looking at and I thought, but I haven't really watched anything she's done, so she didn't go on my list for that reason. I never watched an episode of Brimstone in my life. I do remember seeing the commercials on Fox back in the day for a show and knowing the basic premise. But then you mentioned Reaper. I did watch Reaper. I saw like all the episodes of that.
It's more the trope I want her to do than any actual existing property.
Like I said, like you said, like she does like very witty, character driven projects, and so basically like this would be like kind of like a witty, hip like version of like that trope.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So the next on my list was Damon Lindelof, and I thought, oh my God, Damon Lindelof, like, I'm gonna put him on my list, and what the hell is he gonna do? And I just kept thinking about, like, Lost, and thinking about, like, Watchmen and stuff, and thinking about, like, he excels at kind of, like, these ensemble dramas, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, he did Watchmen, but why not have him do, like, the second biggest, iconic 80s graphic novel series, which is Sandman, right? Sandman would also be like this very cerebral, this very cerebral, type of storyline with like this ensemble cast, because you have like, obviously like the series is about Morpheus and like his family, which are like collectively the Dreaming, and it's hard for me to describe because like all kinds of shit happens in Sandman, right? Because it kind of like spans the DC universe, and like I've only read like some of it, but what I've read was like really good. Like there is a reason that this is like one of the greatest works in graphic novel fiction, and I feel like if Damon Lindelof is courageous enough to tackle Watchmen, he would be courageous enough to tackle this.
Yeah. He'd probably get some slack because it's Damon Lindelof's style to kind of depart a bit from the material,
Right. I feel like the material is malleable.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I don't feel like, and I know like they've been working on the live action adaptation of this for a while, but I feel like just give it to Lindelof. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I was considering, I brought this up at the beginning of the show, I was considering Lindelof, and I just could not think of something to put him in charge of. Like, I'm desperate to get the next Lindelof project, but I'm just kind of at the point where I'm like, I couldn't pick it for him. I just want to see what he ends up coming to, But Sandman would be a pretty good pick from what I know about it. I'm not too familiar with Sandman. I've read, like, certain small arcs. I think I read the one that was, where the art was done by Amano, the guy that did the art for the Final Fantasy game.
Oh, right, yeah.
But I was mostly just kind of like looking at that more than reading it. So I don't have too much experience with it. I've just kind of heard it referenced a lot in geek culture stuff.
Oh, I guess the name of like Morpheus and like his siblings are like the Endless, not the Dreaming. I don't know where the hell I got the Dreaming from.
You were dreaming it.
I was dreaming it, yeah. I just looked it up. I was like, yeah, but like, I see. So you have like, Dream. Morpheus is known as Dream. And then the other Endless, like, are Destiny, Death, Desire, Despair, and Delirium, and Destruction, And, they're metaphysical entities, and one of the things about Sandman, like, it switches genres too. It goes between genres, like, there's fantasy, there's, historical mythology, there's horror, it goes into horror sometimes. Like, that's just like, it's a huge playground for somebody as creative as Lindelof to play in. Mm-hmm. Because, this is a series where these characters, especially Morpheus, they go everywhere. They could be at any place, any point in time, any scenario, like there's total freedom,
Yeah, definitely. My next pick is another one that we both ended up picking, but I'll do mine first here, which is Sera Gamble. And the two of us know Sera Gamble primarily as the showrunner of The Magician. She also worked on like some of the later seasons of Supernatural after Eric Kripke left, you know?
Yeah,
so
like I saw like like when I looked her up, I saw The Magicians, I saw Supernatural, and I was like, yep. Like,
she's really good at doing kind of like fantasy that's kind of funny and has like interesting characters and kind of doesn't take itself too seriously, yet at the same time can have very dark and serious storylines with heavy consequences. She's good at that kind of stuff, and that's why there's a two different series of books by the same author that are kind of in a connected universe, and that's where I'd like to see her play. I'd like to see her play in that universe, not even necessarily as an adaptation of either one of those books series, but as just in that world. And it's called Detroit Free Zone. That's the name of the second series, but that's the one where I think it would be interesting to see her play. And basically the idea of this franchise is that there was all manner of supernatural stuff, but an event occurred like in a prehistoric point in time that basically sealed magic away. And so like humans continued to prosper and evolve and develop, and then magic broke loose again, and all of a sudden you had dragons and spirits and, you know, giant creatures and people becoming like awakening up to being mages, and all this stuff kind of started like coming out. But what's interesting about that is as this stuff's coming out, this event happened kind of around present day, and since then it's been into the future now, and so it's got kind of a cyberpunk vibe to it too.
Interesting.
And the city of Detroit, which is now called the Detroit Free Zone, is like the kind of central point of all of these stories. It's a city that was kind of ruled by a spirit and then now is ruled by something called like a mortal god. And so it's like shifted hands, but it's basically like a city where almost anything is legal. Like you can pretty much get away with anything there. And so it has that whole cyberpunk, you know, black market kind of vibe to it, but it's with dragons and magic and stuff as well. So, and by dragons, I mean dragons that can take the form of humans and stuff too, not just be giant creatures. They can do both. So I just thought like imagining her working in an environment like that, that's like cyberpunk, but also magic and stuff, I think would be fascinating. I think she'd be uniquely qualified to handle the tone of that too, to play off how ridiculous it is and kind of, you know.
That'd be really cool. That'd be awesome. I also chose Sera Gamble. I also chose a fantasy series for her that is heavily comedic, but can also like, you know, it can switch gears and be serious, you know, at times too. Like there's room for it, but you know, and I just thought, she'd be good for Discworld.
Yeah, Discworld's a good pick because, I mean, Fillory and The Magicians, like, had to have some inspiration from Discworld.
It had to, right? That's what I was thinking.
The large part of Fillory is Narnia, of course, but there's other elements that are very Discworldy. Like the kind of like the flat nature of it, like it being kind of, like Fillory itself is kind of like a disc, you know?
Yeah, Fillory, exactly. Some of it had to have taken some inspiration from that. Like, obviously, it's Narnia, and, like, maybe the obvious thing would be, like, Sera Gamble should do Narnia, but that would be corny. Come on.
No, because Narnia is too...
stupid. Yeah.
Narnia doesn't have the humor, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't have the humor like Discworld has, and that's what I love about this idea, is, like, she can do an entire series set in, like, a Fillory-like fantasy world, where, like, everything is, like, topsy-turvy and crazy, you know, and there's so many things she could touch upon, you know, like, the world of Discworld is vast, you know, like, it has its own facets, like, she could do, like, stories about the Watch, or you could do stories about death, or you could do stories about, like, the Magician's Guild with Rincewind, you know, all kinds of stuff, you know, there's all kinds of themes that you can touch upon. I just think, you know, she could even, like, create, like, her own original characters to inhabit that world. And, you know, and maybe, like, even see the world through the eyes of an outsider. Like, there's a lot you could do with that, like, I think in her hands would be, like, really fun.
Yeah. So there's two interesting things about, like, Discworld in here. And one is that, Discworld is constantly being adapted in the UK, but as, like, these little individual stories. So, like, they'll do, like, you know, you mentioned like The Watch. I think there's actually like a mini series about The Watch, but it's not called like Discworld this or something. It's just called like The Watch.
Yeah.
And so they've done stuff like that and stuff, but it would be cool to see something that's a little bit more unified and continuous. That kind of
I'd
goes
like
to
something,
these different areas, but like, you know, is more of like a singular thing that you can get more invested in.
Right. Like I'd like something that explores all the facets of this instead of just like, well, here's a series that's like only about this one facet of Discworld and that's it.
And the other thing is, I was gonna say, the other thing is that we talked about how Discworld had to be an influence on, Fillory in The Magicians. And it just makes me think as you're talking about the Discworld stuff, it just reminds me like when we would do our podcast and talk about the episodes in Fillory, like we would be cracking up and in hysterics talking about like, you know, the morphine forest and these like just ridiculous things that happen in Fillory, these ridiculous bits of comedy, or like this, like in the last season they had that like pig guy, the chauvinist pig.
Yes.
Literally a pig that looks like he's from colonial times and stuff. And I'm like, that's so Discworld.
That is.
that like, you could just see that character just being in Discworld, you know? So yeah, I think that's a great pick for that. You know, it's interesting. And I got to imagine Sera Gamble is very well aware of Discworld too.
I would have to imagine that for sure.
So my next pick is Stephen S. DeKnight. He was the showrunner of these various Spartacus shows. He also did the first season of Daredevil. My pick for him is an RPG series I've been trying to sell Will on for ages now. And that's Shadow Hearts. Shadow Hearts is kind of like a Lovecraftian horror meets fantasy meets historical fiction kind of thing. So it takes place around World War I. So it's kind of like right before, a little bit during, a little bit after World War I. It features historical figures throughout the franchise, including like Rasputin and Anastasia. And it just has like different ones from Japan, from Europe, from different places. And it's like these kind of like world-ending disaster-like things that are coming from elder god-like figures. And, you know, a party of people that go to kind of solve them. And it's got a little bit of obscurity and weirdness to it. And that's why I thought Stephen S. DeKnight would be a good fit, because one of the things that was so great about Spartacus was like just kind of the over the top, like masculinity of everything. Like and the way characters would use phrases like Jupiter's cock and they embrace each other's arms and then the excessive violence. And then yet at the same time was still had like vulnerable characters that had horrible things happen to them that you were invested in, and then the struggles that they went through and how you could cheer for them, but even how they'd have villains that are like kind of relatable, like they're doing really bad things, but at the same time you kind of understand their struggles too, some of them. It makes me really think that he'd be a good pick for something like Shadow Hearts, and I just like to see him work in something in the line of like historical fiction that's a bit more modern than Spartacus, you know?
For sure. Absolutely. I will play Shadow Hearts one day. But my next pick would be Matt and Ross Duffer. I was thinking of a project for them. I thought, okay.
They real quick, they're the Stranger Things brothers. The ones
yeah. They're showrunners, you know, and creators of Stranger Things, which is kind of like the Steven Spielberg, Stephen King horror, you know, like coming of age mashup, I guess. That's been like really popular. Maybe people watched it. I don't know.
We've talked about it.
We've talked about it. But I just thought, I did this dumb cliche thing of like, I'll have them do a Stephen King project. Sure, why not? And I was thinking of it and I thought, Stand By Me has like kids, but it doesn't have like any fantasy elements. I'm kind of like, eh. And then I thought, well, it has both the kids and the fantasy elements, but I thought, you know what, that's veering too close to Stranger Things. Like, I don't want them to just do Stranger Things again with like a different villain.
Plus we just got it, like in the movie.
Yeah, we just got it in the movies. I'm like, that's not. I just thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna have them do like my favorite Stephen King series. I'm gonna have them do a proper adaptation of The Dark Tower, because there are no good adaptations of The Dark Tower. There's supposed to be a TV series. That never happened. So why not make it happen and give it to the Duffer Brothers? I think they could do an amazing job with it. They know like the tropes of Stephen King's writing. Like I feel like they're familiar with like the kind of tropes, and I feel like they're familiar in kind of what makes it work. And I feel like they could do a great job with it.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see them them work on something that's officially Stephen King, rather than something that's very influenced by Stephen King. Yeah, Dark Tower would be interesting. I haven't read any of the Dark Tower books. I'm aware of it just because it's such a part of the cultural zeitgeist. But, it's supposed to kind of tie like all of his works together, isn't it? As well as being its own kind of fantasy series.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Stephen King cinematic universe.
See, that's interesting because one of the things that Stranger Things is so good with is like all of these kind of references and homages to different like movies and stuff from the 80s. And like basically the Dark Tower kind of does the same thing with Stephen King's other works. So it'd be kind of cool to see that presented.
And also like similar to Stranger Things, it also deals a lot with like alternate dimensions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of like hopping across dimensions. Like apparently each of Stephen King's books takes place in a different dimension. And like, so like there's the idea is like there's these these magic doors that they go through to like take them to through like the different dimensions, as the Man in Black is pursuing them across the multiverse, and one of the thing is like the whole like central conceit is like the gunslinger who's like the main character. He's taking these characters he met from like different dimensions. Like in like the second book, he opens like these 3 doors and he draws these characters out of like these 3 dimensions to join him on his quest. And that's like called the Drawing of the Free. And the quest is to find the Dark Tower, which apparently sits at the center of the multiverse and basically holds it together. And the Dark Tower is apparently like under threat, like going to collapse or something, and the multiverse is going to collapse with it, and that's what the Man in Black is trying to ensure happens. And the Man in Black also happens to be like a major villain in Stephen King lore. Like it's revealed that he's also like the Man in Black is also like Flag, like the main antagonist in The Stand. And so it's interesting.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see them do something like that after they wrap up with Stranger Things, which I think they're doing like 1 or 2 more seasons of. So it'd be cool to see like them do something like that as their next project. My next pick is Sam Esmail. This is, you also picked him, so we're going to be doing another 2 back-to-back with this. He was the showrunner, the kind of auteur, you could say, of Mr. Robot. He also has done some directing work and some other stuff recently, like the Homecoming series on Amazon Prime. But what I'd really like to see him do, and this is something that's not even out yet, but is based on something else that's, been around, and that's Cyberpunk 2077. Mm-hmm. So I think Sam Esmail doing Cyberpunk would be amazing. Cyberpunk has so much to do with like hacking and these kind of like dystopian sci-fi kind of ideals. And Mr. Robot was like that in the present day, basically. Like Mr. Robot was about as cyberpunk as you could get in the present. And right. So I think it would be really interesting to see him do an actual cyberpunk thing. And another big reasoning for this pick for me is that his visual style, like when he directs, and he directs most of the stuff he works on, is that he uses like a city-centric style of like cinematography where like the subject might only occupy like a small portion of the frame and then it expands outward so you can see the buildings and the kind of the expanse of the cities and you can see those details. And it's like a huge hallmark of his style. And I think that that is like fitting to something like Cyberpunk to give you these giant vistas of like the technologically advanced city that it takes place in.
Definitely. Definitely. I could see that for sure. My pick, I also picked Sam Esmail, and I'm kind of surprised, like, you didn't go for this, like, you're kind of like the anime aficionado, but I picked Ghost in the Shell because I think for
also kind of cyberpunkish.
yeah, for a lot of same reasons you went with Cyberpunk. Like, I went with Ghost in the Shell because, again, it deals with, like, a future world where, like, technology is prominent, people are getting cybernetic enhancements, and it kind of deals with cyber criminals and like the, rogue hackers and stuff. Like there is, it basically centers around, this like kind of police force whose main job is to stop, cyber crime, cyber hacker, cyber terrorists, and there's this idea like the main character, Major Kusanagi, is like a full-on cyborg. Like she has a human brain, but her like entire like body has been replaced by cybernetic parts. So to the point where like she's officially a cyborg. and they mentioned like one of the major weaknesses of a person being a full-on cyborg is like it makes them more susceptible to hackers who can like take them over and control them. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's interesting too, because we have a main character who can essentially be taken over and controlled by like an outside, consciousness, and that's kind of Mr. Robot-esque, right? Where like,
yeah, I mean, if they're our protagonists, that would make them an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, that would make them an unreliable narrator, just like Elliot. We have like somebody like we don't know, like she could do it so like we don't know who they are at any given moment, if their actions are being controlled or not. There could be that ambiguity that we had with Mr. Robot. And so that's, I think like he would definitely be perfect to do like a more cerebral take on this than like the stupid Scarlett Johansson movie, which was just like more of an action movie than anything. Mm-hmm. Like I think like he would really
dive into the more like philosophical and kind of moral issues and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think this would be perfect.
So my next pick, and this is another one. This is the last one where we pick the same person. But it's Noah Hawley. He was the showrunner of Fargo and Legion. He's, with Fargo, he kind of had like a very Coen Brothers style that he borrowed and used in that because it was a Coen Brothers adaptation. But with Legion, he kind of went like just straight up cartoon surrealism. He went like really weird and wild and stuff. And I was thinking if Noah Hawley was to do a project, something that already existed, that would just be like cartoonish and crazy and surreal and just all over the place, but really interesting that he could take on. And I said, and not just that, but also just have like weird character quirks and things in the same way that like Fargo is really good with. I'm like, what project would that be? And after a while of thinking, it just popped into my head. Time Bandits.
Ah, yeah.
The Terry Gilliam movie, Time Bandits. It was just like a weird masterpiece of like low budget, like high concept, like flying by the seat of the pants style movie making. And I think of like a lot of just the kind of like weird aspects of that and just kind of the interesting things. And I imagine those being kind of stretched out and really given room to breathe by somebody like Noah Hawley. And I think it would be fascinating.
Definitely. I also picked Noah Hawley, and I think we were on the same wavelength in our thinking, but I was struggling to come up with something, and I thought, inspiration hit, and I thought, let's him do like the Rogues from The Flash, because I thought that's interesting because they're like a famous supervillain like group in the DC universe, obviously. And what makes them interesting is like they're all like these flawed, strange, quirky characters, coming together to like, I could see like them coming together to like try to like perform like the greatest crime in history, and just seeing what Noah Hawley would do with that premise would do with these characters, to really dive into like how weird and like dysfunctional they are and how they interact with each other, because that's what he excels at. Like you said, Fargo is like full of like these strange characters. So was Legion to an extent. Like there was a lot of weird characters in Legion.
Yeah.
And I can see like this be, I envision this as more comedic, like Fargo with definitely like some thriller elements, I'm definitely imagining this as like very Fargo-esque, like a very Fargo-esque like superhero or super villain, I guess, like dramedy. And I think he'd do great things with that.
Yeah, we kind of got a taste of the Rogues in some, we've had them in a few storylines here and there in The Flash, and also in Legends of Tomorrow, where they took some of the villains from Flash and Arrow and put them together one season and had them work as like a group being led by the Reverse Flash, who I think is kind of the leader of the Rogues, isn't he?
Not usually, no.
Okay. I'm not too familiar with the original comic source material with the Rogues.
According to, the comic book Rogues is typically Captain Cold, who's the leader, and then there's Mirror Master, Heatwave, the Weather Wizard, the Trickster, the Pied Piper, the Top, and Captain Boomerang.
We kind of have had, I think we had an episode of The Flash or something where we had Captain Cold, Heatwave, Weather Wizard, and somebody else too, I think.
Yeah, we had like we came like very close to like a full lineup in the Flash, but it's such a also like.
But no Holly doing it would be a whole other level, you know.
Yeah, no Holly. Yeah, no. I'm talking about like elevating the material like way beyond the CW, you know. Like doing something on the level of Legion, you know, like with this stuff, you know, like and just like really diving into the personalities, you know, and you know, like he could say like they don't even have to fight the Flash at all in this. Like they could sabotage each other just by like because of like with their personalities clashing and just being outright weirdos.
I'm almost envisioning like an Umbrella Chronicles kind of or an Umbrella Academy kind of thing here.
Yeah.
like a kind of dysfunctional family of sorts.
Yeah, exactly.
So my next pick we're through the ones where we're sharing now, so sharing the same people, but my next pick is Dan Harmon, who is the creator of Community, and he does now what he's probably much more known for is like Rick and Morty. But what I'd like to see him do isn't necessarily an adaptation of anything specific. I'd like to see him do a meta show about the creation and the running of Community, because there's so many crazy stories from that show, from like, you know, the Chevy Chase and the way he acted around set and stuff, that I would love to see a show that literally had somebody playing Dan Harmon, somebody playing these people that were in this.
Why not get Joel McHale to play Dan Harmon?
Yeah, we could do that. You could do like crazy, like do all sorts of like weird stuff, and it would be hilarious. And I'd love to see him do just something like very meta. And of course, you know, if you watch Community's a very meta show. So I'd like to see something like that kind of was like a way for him to kind of express all of his frustrations with shit he went through with both the network and with Chevy Chase in regards to the making of Community, while at the same time giving him the freedom to say, well, you know, I took creative license. This isn't 100% true, you know? So he has like a little bit of an out there, but it would allow him to kind of just fully like lay down the fire on everything that happened on that show. And I think that would be hilarious and awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. My next pick is Jordan Peele. I'm very excited for the upcoming, you know, Lovecraft Country. You know, that's going to be amazing. And I did watch Get Out. I haven't watched the second film, but I love his work, obviously. And I just thought, I was trying to think of a good show for him, and I got to admit, my pick, I never really watched much of the X-Files. I know, like, shame on me, I suppose. Shame. But I feel like everything is getting a reboot. Everything's being brought back. I feel like a reboot of the X-Files is inevitable. And if they do it, it has to be Jordan Peele, because that is right in his wheelhouse of like, where he could tell like these creepy stories that are like with a socially relevant twist or message. You know, like he can do that like really well. And I think
that also pretty much fits his fandom too. Like where he actually is a fan. He's gone on talking about stuff like, I believe the X-Files as well as like Twilight Zone and stuff. And he ended up being involved in the Twilight Zone reboot.
Yes.
So like I could totally see him being involved in like an X-Files reboot.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, I think he would just do it perfecally.
Because X-Files had some funny stuff too.
Yeah,
it would allow him to kind of hit both sides of his style.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good pick as well. So my last pick is Tina Fey, the showrunner of obviously 30 Rock, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And I was thinking I needed to add some kind of a comedy on here. And I put on the Community thing, but I'm like, no, but I want to do something adapted from an existing TV show. And for some reason I was thinking, what are some old sitcoms? And all I could keep getting popping in my head, whether I wanted it or not, was Perfect Strangers. And I think it's
tall on the wings of my dreams.
Maybe it's because I was thinking of The Leftovers and how they did a whole thing in like the third season about like connecting about Perfect Strangers, because one of the guys from Perfect Strangers was the only one that wasn't like raptured in that show. And like, so you actually like have him in the show and he's like mentally fucked up about that. And so maybe that's what's kind of cueing it in for me and making me think about it. Right. But I was thinking like, if you do another like Perfect Strangers, you've got to like bring in somebody kind of interesting for it. it. And so I thought of like Tina Fey, mostly for her like rapid fire delivery of how she does things in like 30 Rock and in, of course, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and the kind of surrealism that she has. And I was thinking about how Perfect Strangers really kind of took kind of the immigrant experience and made it kind of surreal and weird and wacky. And I was like, well, if somebody was going to do the immigration experience, why not Tina Fey? You know, I mean, she's not an immigrant, so she doesn't have that to draw from. I also heavily considered, you know, somebody that came from like immigrant parents or something like Aziz Ansari or something. But right. I think he's more interested in doing serious stuff, like, you know, stuff that's got comedy but is more seriously grounded. And that's why I thought like Tina Fey might be a better pick, tonally for a show like that.
Right. But what about Mindy Kaling? You know, she could do that.
Kind of same thing as Aziz Ansari. Like, I think she's more interested in taking stuff that has more of a serious grounding.
Okay. Right.
So I think it's just the tone that I'm looking for. It would be fitting more for like Tina Fey.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that. Yeah, I mean, that'd be interesting. I mean, sure, why not? I love Tina Fey. I considered putting her on my list. I just got to 10 without her, so that's what happened. Sorry, Tina Fey.
Tina Fey is right now cursing you.
I'm still a fan.
She's pricking a voodoo doll of you right now.
My pick was actually like the first thing I came up with because we were actually having a debate last week about the importance of The Witcher. And so this was the first thing that popped into my head because we were having a debate and you kind of pointed out like, yeah, The Witcher is sort of like a more sophisticated Xena or Hercules. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, I can agree with that. And so then I thought, I kind of low-key want, like, a reboot of Xena. and so I was like, okay, but if they do that, then Lauren Schmidt-Hirsch, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that last name. But she would be perfect for a reboot of Xena, I think.
She's already got the framework in place.
She's already got the framework in place. I think if they were to reboot Xena Warrior Princess and modernize it, like, she would do it justice, I think.
Yeah. So that's it. That's our picks. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Maybe we'll do something else along this line. Maybe we'll do the exact same thing again, or maybe we'll do something else with the whole 10 for 10 from 2 thing, where we kind of like match up 10 of something with 10 of something else and do a little thought experiment like this. Who knows? We could do something like this in the future when we need to fill in a gap where we don't have a show to talk about.
Right.
But until then, let's talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. On Wednesday, August 5th, Corner comes to the CW. On Thursday, August 6th, Hitmen to Peacock, Upright to Sundance Now, Star Trek Lower Gates to CBS All Access.
Lower Decks.
Lower Decks, that's it. And The Rain to Netflix. On Friday, August 7th, High Seas to Netflix, Tales of Arcadia Wizards miniseries animated to Netflix. Again, this is in the same universe as like Troll Hunters. On Sunday, August 9th, Endeavor to PBS, We Hunt Together on Showtime, YOLO Crystal Fantasy on Adult Swim / Cartoon Network. On Thursday, August 13th, 5 Bedrooms to Peacock. On Friday, August 14th, Ted Lasso to Apple TV Plus and The Great Heist to Netflix. And lastly, and most excitingly of this whole list, and one that we are actually going to discuss on this podcast, on Sunday, August 16th, Lovecraft Country on HBO.
Mm-hmm.
We're both really excited about that. We've talked about it quite a few times, including in this podcast, that we're excited for Lovecraft Country. So, and we're going to be discussing that. We're not going to do it right after, like we're not going to do it the Monday after it airs. We have some other stuff in our schedule, but the week after, we're going to cover the first 2 episodes at that point. Next week, we are going to be doing Umbrella Academy Season 2. I just recently finished it. You were like, last time I talked to you, about 3 episodes in. Where are you at now?
I finished episode 4. I'm just watching an episode a day, so.
Yeah, I was trying to do that, and then I'd hit like a cliffhanger at the end of an episode. I'd be like, okay, gotta watch the next one. And then I managed to get through the whole thing, and like.
I'm not powering through it like you did.
I was enjoying it too much to stop, so.
It is good.
Yeah.
It is good.
We really like liked Umbrella Academy Season 1, and we talked about that last week. You could probably still find that podcast and check it out if you want to. But yeah, we're going to be covering Season 2 next week. And then as I mentioned, the week after that, we are going to be doing A Touch of Cloth, which if you are looking for a way to watch it, it is on Amazon. We're going to be doing the entire series for that podcast, but that's 3 seasons, and each season's only 2 episodes. So it's literally 6 episodes for the entire series. But that's what we're going to be talking about, not next week, because next week we're doing Umbrella Academy, but the week after we're doing A Touch of Cloth. So anybody that wants to kind of keep up with that, you can find that on Amazon Prime. So yeah, that's it. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at FuxoHero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Bye.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best in genre television.